we're recording this session for anybody else who wants to be able to see it afterwards. So I've just done most of this, but you know, I'll just run through it very quickly. I've asked you to mute yourselves during the presentation. Given that we're quite a small group, it's not as important. We haven't got any background noise at the moment, so don't worry too much about muting yourselves. And if you do want to ask any questions as I'm going on, that's absolutely fine. You can either use your microphone to do that, you can use the chat option here, or you can use the little hand icon on the middle bar. If I see you raise your hand, then I'll ask you what it is that you want to do. So do feel free, if you want to ask me to go over anything, or anything I'm saying isn't making sense, or it's just brought up something else, do feel free to use any of those to ask me a question. Okay, right, let's get on with it then. So the first thing that I want to say about this session is that I'm not going to go through the absolute basics of how to set up a LinkedIn profile or anything like that. We do have information about that on our website. So if you go to myhub.leedsbeckett.ac.uk and click on the careers page there, and then you have a look at some of the careers resources in the applying for jobs menu, you'll see that there's some information there on how to set up a LinkedIn profile. But I'm sort of making the assumption here that most people who joined today have some familiarity with what LinkedIn is, what it's doing, and we're really thinking about how can you use LinkedIn more effectively to make connections with people. So just going to ask you, I know some of you and some of you will and some of you won't have access to that little hand icon. If you do have access to it, then click on there or just type yes in the chat box. How many people do have a LinkedIn profile? And then the next big question, how many of you check it more than once a month? And is there anybody who's managed to do something, found an opportunity, joined a group, found some useful information, any of those kinds of things through LinkedIn? Yeah, we have a few people who have got their LinkedIns, that's good. And is there anybody who's, as I say, has found an opportunity or anything and wants to say in the chat box how they've actually managed to, what kind of opportunity or information or anything they've found through LinkedIn? Okay, I'll move on. Sometimes the problem is even if people actually are answering things, then it takes a while for it to come through. So this is a short session. I don't want to wait too long. I've also got the there's the link at the bottom to our LinkedIn page. So if you want more information on how to set up a LinkedIn page, what LinkedIn actually is, then you can go there. But just to make it really simple, LinkedIn is kind of a it's kind of a professional version of Facebook or something like that, in that you have your profile on there with your real name and then with information about, you know, who you are, what you've done, your education, the kinds of things that you put on your CV, like work experience, memberships, all of those kinds of things. And then you can link up with other people. So you'll have your first level contacts, who are the people that you're directly linked with. What you then have on LinkedIn are your second level contacts. So those are the people who are linked with, you are linked with. So your friends are friends in Facebook terms. Then you have third level contacts, your friends, friends, friends. I think one thing about LinkedIn that's very clear is that when you want to start using it more efficiently, just add more people, add each other at university, add other people on your course, add your academic staff, add your careers contacts and other people from the careers team as well. One thing about LinkedIn is that the more contacts you have, the more you can see. So you can not, you know, if somebody has something, if their profile on there, but it's locked down quite tightly, then it may only be that their friends can see it, but it may be that their friends' friends can see it, or it may be that their friends' friends' friends can see it. So the more people you have on your LinkedIn as first level contacts, and the more people they have got as their first contacts, the more you can get out of it, just because the more you can see. And I think that kind of stuff is really, really useful, because you can go and look at people who've got the job that you want to have in a few years' time and see how they got there. What was their actual career path to get there? What was their first job after university? What kind of things did they say they did in that job? What was their second job? Did they work for the same organisation in a lesser role before they've got the role that they've got now? You've got access to all of those people's CVs and career stories, which is incredibly helpful for helping you plan yours and understand what's necessary and what's possible. Now, not everybody fills in their LinkedIn in a particularly detailed way, so you're not going to get all the information about everybody, but there's enough people there that you really can get some really useful information and quite detailed and granular information about how to work in particular areas and how that works. So this is some of the model that we're using today, and I've just been through this with some of you that was in the previous session. And we're thinking about, these are 4 different areas that are really helpful for helping you think about and plan your career. I'm just going to look at the top 2 now. So curiosity is a really big thing, that thing where you are starting to think about, oh, I might like to work in that area. I might like to get into investment banking or corporate law or working with homeless people or teaching, whatever it might be. When you're just starting to think about, that's something that I'm a little bit interested in, what's that actually like? Think about how you can develop that curiosity. Think about what are some of the things that you would really like to know about working in that area. What's it like on a daily basis? Who would I be working with? What are some of the types of jobs in that area? What kind of company or organization would I be working for? Even things like, what kind of contracts do I have? What's some of the entry-level positions? Once you start asking yourself those questions, and you start realizing what you don't know already and what you would like to know. And then the second thing is to be starting to think about, how can you find some of that out? And some of that will be available when you go and start doing research online. LinkedIn, again, is a great place to start doing some of that research, and you can just go and look at other people's profiles, how they've got there, what they're doing now, what kind of things they talk about, what kind of skills they've got, or what kind of qualifications, and all those kinds of things. But equally, you will get to a point where you can't find out more information just by going and reading things. And that's where the career courage comes in. The bit where you've got to step outside your comfort zone, you've got to go and talk to some new people, and you've got to start asking some questions, building your network to find out more detail about what it might be like working in that area. So that's what we're focusing on now for this session. It's how you can really use LinkedIn to actually reach out to people, make some connections, and start finding out kind of real people's first-hand experience of what it's like working in the areas that you're interested in. I can see I've got a few people who've still got their hand up there, and I'm not sure if that's from the original question when I asked about who's got a thing. If you once you've raised your hand, you do have to lower it, which is a slight disadvantage here. Okay, so all those hands have gone down. It turns out people weren't asking questions after all. Just wanted to make sure. Okay. So again, something I just talked about in the previous suggestion. One of the problems that you run into a lot at this stage when you just finished your degree and you're starting out is that you can't get experience because you've got no experience. So you can look for all of these jobs that you'd like to do, and they all say, oh, well, you know, must have a year's experience, must have 6 months experience, must have 3 years experience. And you think, but how do I get the experience if I haven't got it? That's a real sticking point that people get stuck in, and it's really, really frustrating. I've been in that situation 2 or 3 times in my life when I've wanted to make sort of slight changes in terms of what I'm doing, or just when I was starting out as well, and it feels so unfair. What I want you to understand is that while sometimes, yeah, there are some jobs that you can't get without previous experience, but equally, everybody starts somewhere. So everybody at some stage was that person with no experience who needs to get that first experience. One of the things that often gets you over that hump is just that opportunity of talking to people to understand more about how this job works, how this world works, how this organization, company, sector, etc. works. Just so that you start getting the right language, that you understand the kinds of things people are thinking about, that what they're doing all day, who they're working with, those kinds of things. And it's that kind of knowledge that is what gets you over that initial thing. So even though I haven't got you know, a year's experience in this area, I've talked to quite a lot of people, and I managed to do a couple of weeks work experience with one of them, and I've got some other stuff that's quite similar and related, and I've got a bit of my degrees in this area, or I've got some good skills from my degrees. That's enough to convince somebody to take a chance on you. So that's one of the things that we're doing today, is about how you get over that bump into, I haven't got the experience, how do I get the first experience? Okay, so what is LinkedIn good for? Now, I used to be one of these people who like check my LinkedIn about once every month. In about the last 6 months or so, I've started, students have been using it a lot more that I've been working with, and I've been checking it most days. And actually, I hate to admit this, but the more you use it, the more useful it becomes. So I've now got lots and lots of students on my LinkedIn, mostly from the law school, because that's who I work with. And I see all these fascinating things that students are doing. I see lots of students who are saying, oh, I've just done this webinar, or oh, I've signed up for this, or oh, I'm doing this internship. I also see students who are lots of Leeds Beckett students who are linked up with law school students at other universities and are seeing what those other students are doing and what kind of activities they're involved with. And again, it's just brilliant. So we're seeing everybody learning from each other and understanding what kind of possibilities are out there. It's there to help you connect with professionals. So there to help you both identify people who are doing things that you would like to do in the future or that you're interested in, and then an opportunity to actually speak with those people. It can also help you connect with some of the organisations and graduate talent recruiters if you are looking for things like traditional graduate schemes or big organisations and big companies that recruit large numbers of graduates. Then they have people specifically doing that work, and nearly all of them use LinkedIn a lot. So if you are interested in particular companies and you go and follow the people who are their graduate recruiters, they will give you a lot of information about their process, about any extra events that they're running, all of those kinds of things. You can also find articles and webinars, and every now and then people do actually find jobs on LinkedIn. One thing I want to be clear with is that in my experience as a careers advisor, I think I've seen one person who put their profile up on LinkedIn as a graduate and actually got contacted by somebody to say, please come and apply for our graduate program. So we sometimes talk about it as if, you stick your profile up and the job offers will just come flooding in. That is not my experience. I've only seen that happen to one person, although let's face it, one person isn't bad. But really, it's all about that information. It's about sharing that kind of contacts. It's about seeing what's going on. It's about understanding where the networking opportunities are, the seminars, webinars, internships, all of those kinds of things taking place, and then actually finding people that you can contact. So I just want to think about this idea of thinking about mentors, role models, and other contacts. I'd like you to think just now, who are your role models? And they might be professional role models, they might be personal role models, they might be people you've met in education, and to think about who are your role models. I also want you to think about, do you have a mentor? And if you do have a mentor, if you don't have a mentor, do you know what the difference is between a role model and mentor? Because one thing I want to be quite clear about in this session is for you to think about what the difference is. And when you are starting to identify people and connections who might be useful to you in LinkedIn, are you contacting them about the right things? Are your expectations of how they can help you and what they can help you with actually accurate? So I'd like you to think about the difference between a role model and a mentor, and who some of your role models are. Okay, and here's a question for the chat then. If you do have a role model, or you do have a mentor particularly, or if you know the difference, what do you think the differences are between role models and mentors? Does anybody want to raise their hand or type something into the chat box? Okay, Robin, do you want to, what would you say is the difference?
Hi, sorry, I was just halfway through tapping something then. I was had my microphone on mute. So yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting question, isn't it? So I reckon that a mentor might be somebody who you have a more of a personal relationship with, somebody who perhaps you kind of who might speak with on a one-to-one basis, or is giving you advice and support in terms of what you want to do. A role model might be somebody who you're kind of aspiring, not necessarily to be them, but aspiring to elements of what they've achieved or what they're doing. So for example, me personally, I'm a member of the careers team, and I've wondered in the past about being managing a careers team, so moving up to being in a head of careers position. And I've thought about one or two people I know who are in that kind of job that I know of, and see how they have a good reputation in what they do, and that's a kind of a role model for me. Equally, I've seen some people in that kind of role who perhaps are things that I wouldn't want to do if I were in that kind of role. I would do a different approach, and in some ways that's almost a useful thing in a different kind of way to that kind of, here's the ideal that you're aiming for as well.
Yeah, and I think it's also, we've got a response here from Holly. A role model is someone you look up to, and a mentor is someone you talk to one-to-one and objectively helps you progress, somewhere along those lines. And I think, that's a really good definition. I think the thing about role models as well is, they might be people you've never spoken to or who've never spoken to you. They might also be people who you have in a professional role model sense, in that they've got the job that you would like to do. But one of the things you just said there, Robin, was something about, you like their approach. A role model can be somebody who is working in a totally different field to you, or it could be somebody who's not professional at all, but they just are somebody who has qualities that you admire or that you like. I did some role model work with students as part of Women in Leadership last year, and there were people kind of saying, my aunt is my role model because of the way she does this and the way she approaches that, and like people can be role models that aren't just in a kind of professional sense, or it can be about the way that they approach things as well. So when we're thinking about this thing of developing contacts, role models, mentors on LinkedIn, I want to be kind of quite clear that these are different things, and so that you are clear about what you're asking for and what you can expect. A mentor, as Robin has just said, as Holly has said, a mentor is somebody you talk to one-on-one. That is quite a personal relationship. I would not recommend that you go on LinkedIn looking for a mentor, because you're kind of effectively asking people to get into a one-to-one, quite supportive, quite close relationship with you. And that's not really what LinkedIn is good for. Mentorships are usually set up deliberately through schemes like the university setting up a mentorship scheme where we match students with mentors, or in some cases staff with mentors. Or there's something that comes out of a close personal relationship because you've worked with somebody and they've respected your attitude and they like the kind of work you do and they're more senior to you. They've decided to invest in and help you with that. But it's not something that you can kind of go out looking for a mentor just like that, really. It's something that kind of either happens organically or happens as part of a program. Whereas a role model can really be anybody. It's just somebody, and it can be somebody that you don't speak to, but it's somebody that you admire, that you look up to, that there's some kind of element about what they're doing that you think, that's something I would like to imitate. It might be something quite specific. You might not like 80% of what they do, but 20% of it you think is really, really good. And that's what you're interested in. But I also want to just think about some of those other contacts that are neither role models nor mentors, but are just people that you find interesting, that you want to talk to, that have got some information that you might need. All of those, that is another great use for LinkedIn, where it's neither somebody who's a role model or a mentor, it's just somebody who might be a good contact for you, somebody who's got some information about how things work that you could really find useful talking to them. So here's our definitions then. Role model, somebody in this position you'd like to be in one day, or somebody who had qualities you admire. Somebody who's mentor, somebody who supports and offers you advice and guidance. And a contact, somebody who you may or may not be able to help you professionally. And I don't necessarily mean that in help you professionally as in a very kind of like targeted and specific thing where somebody is going to say, hey, here's a job for you, or let me give you a leg up. But it might just be somebody who can tell you how things work, or recommend that you speak to somebody, or recommend that you start reading this, or you join that group, or you put yourself forward for this, or just somebody who can look over your application or your CV or something like that. There's all sorts of different ways that people can help you. And I would really recommend that you think about who the right people are to help you for the right different things, and you ask people in appropriate ways rather than asking for things that they aren't able to help with. So if you're looking for a role model on LinkedIn, I think it's really role models and contacts that we're going to talk about. LinkedIn is really, really good for helping you find people with values that you share, who are doing work you admire, or people who hold a position you might want in 5 or 10 years' time. So again, people that you can kind of like, something that you've got to learn from about the way they approach something. That might be somebody that you end up having a personal relationship with, that you contact them and you speak to them or something like that, or again on LinkedIn. You know, all of that information is out there. So it might just be somebody that you kind of check their profile, you see what they're doing, and you learn from that without ever contacting them.
Maybe just to jump in there on
Yeah.
one thing as well, if I can. One of the things that sometimes students come and chat to us and say, you know, why people aren't accepting my connections, or I'm not seeming there to kind of to get to know the important people and the companies that I want to find out or want to be in. And I think it can be useful to remember that why are other people on LinkedIn? It's their own professional network. So if you want to go and work for, I don't know, Leeds United, let's just pick a random thing out of the blue. You know, if the chief executive of Leeds United Football Club is on LinkedIn, it's to develop his professional network. You know, people in professional roles, whether it's 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 years into their career, they're using LinkedIn as part of their own kind of professional networking tool. So people are fantastic on LinkedIn on providing support and help and responding. But if they don't, it's not a personal thing about you. It's because they are looking to identify how they use LinkedIn as a tool for themselves. They're not there hanging around waiting for people to ask them for advice on things.
I think it's also important to remember that the number of people who set up a LinkedIn profile back in 2014 or something, and look at it twice a year since then, is vast. So one thing that I would always recommend is that if you are starting to make contact with people on LinkedIn, and there are sort of people you want to talk to, spread the net pretty wide. I was saying in the most recent session before this one, I generally assume that you're probably going to get a kind of like 10%, maybe 20% response rate. So if you want to talk to somebody who works in a particular area, you probably want to start with a list of about 20 people that you can potentially contact, and contact those people and expect that you will never hear back from 15, 18 of them. You need quite a long list to start with, because there's going to be quite a high attrition rate at each stage. So let's assume then you've gone out and you've done some research and you've identified a lot of people working in the area that you're interested in, that you'd like to speak to. You've got as much information as you can from their public profiles, and you kind of see the kind of work that they're doing. There's elements of it that appeal to you and that you'd be interested in talking to them. So the next thing is contacting them. Now on LinkedIn, you can just send a straightforward message request. But you are more likely to get a response if you are sending some kind of like brief personal message in there, and it has to be brief. You can't actually put in an entire essay of like, this is what I'm doing, this is what blah 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 blah. You've got something like 200 characters. So that first paragraph that I've got up there, I'm a final year, or I've just completed a degree in pizza studies and I'm interested in working in the mozzarella industry, I'd like to connect with you. That's about as much information as you can get into a LinkedIn thing, and that's really what you need. I would always recommend including that. I'm a second year, I'm a final year, I've just completed a degree and I'm interested in. You sound really organized and on it. When you're kind of like doing this at quite an early stage of your career, it's really, really useful. You've given them a reason to be interested. But also at the same time, remember, not everybody checks LinkedIn every week. Just accept some things aren't meant to be. If somebody does respond and accept your offer, that's the time to sort of say, thanks for connecting. I'd really like to ask you a few more questions about working in the mozzarella industry. Would that be possible? Again, you might not get immediate responses back, but you might do, and it's worth a try. You're not offending anybody. You're not going to, the worst case scenario is that somebody just doesn't respond or get back to you. So preparing for that conversation, one thing that is really, really important is that you think carefully about your questions and what's genuinely interesting to you. You've got to be genuine and authentic when you're trying to do these things. If you start trying to come up with questions that you think sound impressive, that aren't things you genuinely want to know, it just doesn't come off well. It tends to end up with people saying things like, so I'm aware that you're a £3 million with a turnover of £3 million, and that you were sort of the second largest mozzarella making farm in the Cotswolds in 2010. And what I really wanted to ask you about is it's kind of like, why are you giving me all of this information? I know this information about my company. Whereas questions about what kind of milk do you use? How many cows are there on your farm? How did you even get into mozzarella industry? I didn't know this was a big thing. Those are the kinds of questions where you've got an actual genuine interest in the answer that really start to, that's how you build up a rapport with somebody, and that's how you impress somebody with your interest. You should also have done the research that you possibly can do. So again, if you're going to somebody and asking the absolute basic level questions, you're not going to be super impressed. If you go to a lawyer and say, hello, I'm a law student, how do I become a lawyer? That's a perfectly reasonable question to ask when you're 16 or 17 and just starting out. At the stage where you've perhaps got a degree, if you're going to talk to a lawyer and finding out more about law, they will expect that you will have done some research and you understand the basic building blocks of how to become a lawyer. So don't go in there with kind of like the basic questions, do a little bit of research, but then think carefully about what it would be useful to you to know next. So I know this is too much information on this slide, and but have a look at it afterwards. But I just wanted to give you some ideas, and one of the ways to think about the different questions you can ask is you might want to ask questions about the sector. So that might be the mental health sector, it might be the manufacturing sector, it might be the retail sector, the overall big chunk of the job market that this person or people works in. What's the kind of the culture of that sector? What are good things and bad things about working in this area? What are some of the professional organizations or professional publications I ought to be reading? You might want to ask questions about their specific organization, about the company or the organization that they work for. Where do they advertise their jobs? Who do their clients tend to be? What's their COVID-19 response been like? That's a really popular one to ask at the moment. What kind of roles are available in that organization? As Robin has just said in the chat, you want to be asking for the information you won't find on the company easily. Because again, you would want to look like you've done some background research, and this is about you getting that extra information. And lastly, you might want to ask questions about their specific role or their specific degree. A big question that I think is really useful for lots of people to ask is, do I need a master's degree? And if so, is it a case that I need to have that master's degree and I won't be considered for a job without one? Or is it a case that a master's degree can be advantageous, but we frequently recruit people straight out of undergraduate degrees as well? And just, you know, is there anything else anybody else I should talk to? Is there anything else you think I should be reading? What would your recommendations be for me? These are the kinds of things that can give you a really, really good insight, and particularly at the moment where, you know, a lot of the places that you might struggle to get some traditional work experience, this is the kind of question and conversation that can really help you just get that insight that's going to make you look solid, reasonable, like somebody who really knows what you're doing when you write those applications or go into interview. Some other things to think about. Are you going to ask them some questions by email, or do you want to try and make a phone appointment? Always remember that they're doing you a favour and express your gratitude. Make sure you've done your research first. I would actually say that doing your research first is part of expressing your gratitude, because it's part of recognising that their time is valuable and you're not going to be bothering them with some of the basic questions. You've done that work for yourself, and you're there to ask them the extra questions you couldn't find out you couldn't find out by yourself. And then if the conversation goes well, if you feel like you are managing to strike up a rapport with this person, that's a good point to ask about things like shadowing or work experience. Now, under normal circumstances, I'd say that, you know, you're restricted to asking about shadowing or work experience if it's somewhere that you can physically get to. At the moment, so much stuff has shifted online that that's actually created a lot more opportunities. Depending on how confidential the area that people work in or something like this, if you've struck up a conversation with somebody and you've actually find that you're getting on quite well, that's a good time to ask, is there any chance I could just shadow you on some of your virtual meetings just by signing in? Would that be a possibility? Sometimes that is going to be an outright no. It's just not possible for strangers to be able to sort of sign in and be able to hear that kind of thing. It might be confidential, etc. Other times that might be a possibility, and again, that's a fantastic opportunity for you to get a little bit more insight into what people in that area are talking and thinking about. Okay, I've more or less come to the end there. My final recommendation to you is that you do one thing today, which is to create or update your LinkedIn profile, and the link for that is back earlier on in one of the slides. But again, if you go to the My Hub page and then onto careers and look at our applying for jobs tab, you'll see the link there to the LinkedIn pages, the link to the LinkedIn pages. Yes. Okay, I need to leave now, I'm afraid. I'm going to just leave this open for a few more minutes in case Robin has any questions, or rather than Robin has any questions, in case you have any questions for Robin. And finally, we'd also just like you to just say in the chat before you go, whether you find this session useful, has it given you any new ideas and some thoughts about what you might want to do next? Thank you very much.
Yeah, just to pick up there then, so I think Mary has to dash off on one of other things, so she may well disappear from our screens, but as I say, I'm another member of the careers team here, and I'm happy to hang around for 5-10 minutes, so feel free to pop any questions you've got in the chat box. If not, and then yeah, thank you for those comments. Looks like Mary's done a fab job of giving an overview